Welcome back. I'm hoping you are all well. This is the story of Marie Laveau, New Orleans voodoo queen, so please hit that like and subscribe button. Okay, let's get into the life of Marie Laveau. Few people have captured people's imagination like Marie Laveau. Famous for being a voodoo priestess, Marie Laveau's story is shrouded in mystery. Whether you're on a ghost tour, a voodoo tour, or a historical tour of New Orleans, the chances are high that you will hear stories and legends of the city's beloved queen of voodoo, Marie Laveau. Marie Laveau was a free person of color living in the most colorful city in the United States, New Orleans. An article in the New Orleans Times-Picayune, April 1886, adoringly remembered Marie Laveau as gifted with beauty and intelligence. She ruled her race and made captive of many of the other, a Creole woman with her own set of rules and strong beliefs who was surrounded by the political and religious influence of wealthy white men. Marie Laveau was a trailblazer for all women, her strong convictions and loyal confidentiality. The early life of Marie Laveau. It is believed that Marie Laveau was born in the French Quarter of New Orleans. When she was born was not recorded, but by doing some research and math, it has been deduced it was in 1801. Her mother, Marguerite d'Arcantrol, was a freed slave and mistress of her father, Charles Lavue, a wealthy mulatto businessman. Marguerite gave birth to Marie at her mother, Miss Catherine's home, and then returned to her relationship, leaving her baby girl with her mother. Marie Laveau was the firstborn free in her family. It is said that Marie's great-grandmother came to New Orleans as a slave from West Africa in the mid-1700s. Her grandmother, Catherine, was purchased by a free woman of color. Catherine was eventually able to buy her freedom and build her small home in the French Quarter, where Marie Laveau would live and become the legendary voodoo queen of America. A famous painting of Marie Laveau. Marie Laveau, wife and mother. On August 4, 1819, a young Marie Laveau married Jacques Paris, a free person of color from Haiti, at St. Louis Cathedral. Her father, who never married her mother but signed documents declaring to be Marie's father, stood at her wedding and signed the marriage contract on her behalf on July 27, 1819. Her wedding gift from her father was the property that he owned on Love Street, now North Rampart. But documents show that by 1820 Marie and Jacques were living on Dauphine Street between Domaine and Street Philip. The city directory lists Jacques as a cabinet maker. Most researchers say that Marie and Jacques did not have any children. However, baptismal records from St. Louis Cathedral show entries for two daughters. Marie-Angélie Paris, baptized in 1823, and Félicite Paris, baptized in 1824, are both listed as the daughters of Marie Lavue and Jacques Paris. Félicite's records state that she was 7 years old at the time of her baptism, which would mean that she was born in 1817, 2 years before Marie and Jake's marriage. Unfortunately, the records on Marie-Angélie and Félicite stop there. The mysteries that surround Marie Lavue started early in her life. The disappearance of her first two daughters is similar to the disappearance of Jake Paris. There is no documentation of his death, though the baptismal record of Félicite declared him to be deceased. What we do know for certain is that Marie called herself the Widow Paris for the remaining years of her life. In around 1826, Marie found love again with Louis Christophe Dumansnil de Glapion. Glapion came from a prominent New Orleans family, a wealthy white gentleman that would spend his last 30 years in a common law. Marriage with Marie Lavue. Interracial couples were common in New Orleans, but forbidden to marry by law. Marie's grandmother passed away in 1831. A creditor surfaced and claimed that Catherine was indebted to her home and an additional lump sum. Her cottage on St. Anne, which Marie had grown up in, was put up for auction. Glapion came to the rescue and purchased her childhood home. The Creole cottage on St. Anne would continue to be the home of Marie Lavue, Christophe Glapion, and their family until the end of the 19th century. Christophe Glapion died in June of 1855 after being Marie Lavue's common-law husband and devoted father to their children for almost 30 years. There is no evidence of Marie ever taking up with another man after Glapion's death. One can only assume she knew it would be impossible to replace a love so big. There are stories out there that say Marie started having babies with Glapion immediately and that they had 15 children over 20 years. However, what is recorded is that they had 7 children from 1827–1839. 3 of these children died in infancy. Marie Philomene Glapion, born of Free Quadroon in 1836, lived the longest of the children. She would eventually be who many assumed was the infamous Marie Lavue, Voodoo Queen or Good Samaritan. Gods always behave like the people who make them. Zora Neale Hurston. Nobody knows how Marie Lavue spent her days or her nights, but the story that most tour guides tell is that she was a hairdresser to wealthy white women who felt comfortable confessing their darkest secrets and fears to Marie. Some part-time researchers think that Marie too held the hairdresser profession. The widow Paris was much more likely to spend her days in service to others. Marie was a generous woman of the devout Catholic faith and was known to use her means and magic to help those in need. Marie attended Catholic Mass regularly, her home filled with images of saints, and she created a space that was protected and safe for all that lived with or visited her. She ministered to prisoners locked up inside the Cabildo, offering guidance to redemption and forgiveness through Jesus Christ. Marie Lavue was a woman filled with compassion and strong religious faith and a clear intention to help the people in her community. John Kendall, a local writer in the early 20th century and a self-professed expert on Marie Lavue, wrote, "After dark, you might see carriages roll up to Marie's door, and veiled ladies, elegantly attired, descend and hurry in to buy what the old witch had for sale. An errant fraud, no doubt, but money poured into her lap down to the last day of her evil life." Mr. Kendall was not a fan of Miss Lavue. Perhaps he was one of many that thought voodoo was part of the dark arts, which is unfortunate. The core value of New Orleans voodoo is protection. New Orleans voodoo is the only Afro-Catholic religion to emerge in North America. New Orleans voodoo was born of the influence of not only the African nations that were at the root of the religion but also from the New World colonies that had brought in African slaves. We have to remember that in the 1700s there were many enslaved in Saint-Domingue, Cuba, Brazil, as well as Louisiana. And it was the Haitian Revolution that began in 1791 that had the most significant influence on the creation of New Orleans voodoo. And it was the frightening stories of the revolution that heightened the fear of religion in the white community. The Haitian Revolution began with a voodoo ceremony at Bois Cayman. A voodoo priest led the service, which included sacrificing a pig and a blood oath to overthrow the French. Just a few days later, rebel slaves began to burn the sugar plantations and kill the white population. The New Orleans Spanish Judicial Archives has a 1,773 documented case in which several slaves were tried for conspiring to kill their master and the slave overseer using grease. Grease in New Orleans is a bag of herbs or magical substances that are carried or delivered to take control over another for protection or good luck. This comes from the African gris bags with blessed objects or substances that were believed to have magical properties of protection or power. The slave owners were convinced that the practice would incite slave rebellions. It is likely that as the influx of African and Haitian slaves was coming into Louisiana and New Orleans, their practices began to blend. Some say that the elders passed down what they remembered and the young slaves began to incorporate all of these practices into what is. There is much speculation on how Marie Laveau rose to her throne as voodoo queen. There is the theory that she trained under the guidance of Sana Dd and Marie Salop. Probably the most exciting theory is that she was a student of the famous Dr. John, and others rationalize that she would have been raised in a collaboration of Catholicism and voodoo by her grandmother and mother, both of whom would have been practitioners of the Catholic faith. There may even be some elements of truth in all of these theories. Marie Laveau, an illustration of her in Congo Square, which is where Marie Laveau often gathered with her followers of voodoo. Visit New Orleans and take a cemetery or ghost tour and you will undoubtedly hear about Marie Laveau's followers and her mysterious gatherings in Congo Square. Congo Square is just a short walk over Rampart Stede from the Lavue Glapion House on Stede, and in the 1800s, Code Noir granted Sundays and holidays to the New Orleans slaves. They would spend their free time cultivating gardens, fishing, and other things that would give them goods to sell and trade. Many would have their Sunday worship at Stede, Augustine's church, and walk over to Congo Square with their goods to set up a market. By the mid-1800s, Congo Square had become more than a market. It was a community center for New Orleans people of color. Marie Laveau would attend the gatherings in Congo Square on Sundays and sell her grease bags, offer advice and service to her community, and partake in the celebration. It is here that legends talk about her singing and performing her spiritual celebrations, conjuring the great serpent spirit and becoming filled with the spirit of Loa, wearing her Queen of Voodoo crown proudly. The Congo Square celebrations were weekly. However, there was one night a year that was sacred to the Creoles who practiced voodoo, Stede, John's Eve. Stede, John's Eve, or the eve of the Fest of Stede, John the Baptist, is an observance of the summer solstice, Midsummer's Eve. The day is acknowledged and celebrated among many cultures and religions, dating back to the Celtics, Druids, and European pagan rituals. For the New Orleans voodoo community, it meant coming together for ritual bathing in sacred waters and communing around bonfires. And like the Sunday Congo Square celebrations, Stede, John's Eve ceremonies were supposedly led by Marie Laveau. Marie Laveau, during her ceremonies at Stede, John's Bayou, one of Laveau's gatherings in Stede, John's Bayou outside of New Orleans. You can use your imagination and the images that have been planted in our minds by modern cinema to picture what exactly. In July of 1869, a local news column reported, June is the time devoted by the voodoo worshippers to the celebration of their most sacred and therefore most revolting rites. The writer goes on to describe midnight dances, bathing, and eating, together with less innocent pleasures. There is an interesting little mention in the article where the writer announces the retirement of Marie Laveau. He refers to her reign as the voodoo queen for a quarter of a century. Today, the celebration of St. John's Eve is still alive and revered. It takes place on Bayou St. John in New Orleans. Marie Laveau attended daily mass well into her old age and visited prisoners, trying to convince them to repent their sins for salvation. Surely the folks in the French Quarter saw her continue with her routines over the decades. But as we now know, the gossip and embellishments that surrounded her. Marie Laveau's tomb is the most visited tomb in all of New Orleans cemeteries. Unfortunately, not all visitors are respectful, and there have been countless acts of vandalism to her tomb. The defacing of her tomb became such an issue that the Archdiocese and New Orleans Catholic cemeteries no longer allow tourists to enter St. Louis No. 1 cemetery without a licensed tour guide who holds a permit from the NOC. If we listen to the guides on ghost tours or voodoo tours, then we are excitedly led to believe that Marie Laveau was indeed a voodoo queen and that her ghost still roams her cottage on St. Street Anne and has even been sighted at her tomb. Unfortunately, the only recorded truth to any of those stories is that she indeed lived and died in her St. Anne Street cottage, which was demolished in 1907.